Book 1, Chapter 1, Nightmare Island. From a bird's eye view through the wispy clouds, the deep blue ocean could be seen. With this perspective, the entire body of water became a curvy mirror, reflecting the beautiful skies. There were many verdant islands dotting the boundless ocean, but under a certain rain cloud lay a more special one, an island of about 40 kilometers wide. It was a somewhat rhombus-shaped island, with a perfectly straight peak at its center. From far away, the vast island looked as if a sword was lodged into it. This island was entirely surrounded by massive cliffs, without a single beach. The waters below the cliffs were unusually turbulent, and the sound of angry tides ramming into the disarrayed reefs was often heard. With this structure around the fringes of the island, it meant that it was a sealed-off island upon which no ship could berth. On the south side of the island, at a protruding cliff, a 15-year-old young boy, wearing thin clothes, sat at the edge of the rocks. He watched the seas and the unknown land beyond with wistful eyes, yet there was also a mysterious trace of grief. This was a gloomy face that did not match his age. However, he maintained it without any disguise. It was his genuine feelings that were shown. The storming waves battered the cliff, occasionally spraying upwards. The ocean winds bit into the young boy's thin clothes, tousling his messy hair. The young boy sat silently on the cliff like a statue, his insignificant body facing the violent tides. After a period of time, a horn sounded out from the depths of the forest. Hearing the horn, the boy showed a loath expression, but nevertheless stood up and walked towards the sound. The boy looked thin, but his movements were agile. In the intricate forest, he dashed with ease. Very soon, he arrived at an open area within the forest. The open area was circular, with a radius of about 100 meters. Around the open area was a wall made up of 30-meter-high wooden pikes, creating a village-like campground. The campground only had one entrance. At the entrance were 4 men in green clothes. These 4 men were all about 30 years old, with nothing that stood out. But what did stand out were the frightening fangs of the wolf-like beasts beside them. The 4 fierce wolves saw the boy walk in and immediately growled, baring their bony white teeth and threatening to pounce on the lean boy. "Get your ass in here. Coming here this slowly. Do you wanna die, Humphrey? Your body won't even satisfy my coyote's nightly snack." The young boy stayed out of the coyote's reach and ran inside the base. Looking at the back of the boy, the spiky-haired man spat with disdain. "If only I knew who brought this kid in. He looks too weak to do anything, nevertheless withstand the torture of our nightmare camps." It was Boxia, I heard. The other red-haired man paused, and in a deep voice continued. "You know the kid's already a dead man." "A dead man?" Gulai snorted. "Which one of these little bastards aren't already dead men?" Gulai said carelessly. "You don't understand. That kid used to be the young master of a clan. He offended somebody, so they hired people in the Nightmare Palace to get rid of him. Boxia is responsible for this mission, so after he kidnapped this kid, since he was supposed to die anyways, he thought he might as well let him sign a soul pact with a white nightmare. This way, we would have another slave to work with." At the mention of the white nightmare, the 3 men beside him all drew in a breath. One man said in a whisper, "How does Boxia have things like the white nightmare? And is that kid really that special? Can he withstand the white nightmare?" "No way. If that kid had that sort of power, he'd have been sent to White Nightmare Island already. How would he still be here?" "I don't know how Boxia got hold of a white nightmare, but I know Boxia's just using the kid as an experiment, with the mentality that the kid's dead already. I believe it won't take long before the kid is devoured by the white nightmare." The red-haired man laughed, not caring at all about the death of the boy. "Ha, so that's how it is. I've always hated that kid anyways, he might as well die." Back to the main topic. Boxia doesn't seem simple, having a nightmare we haven't even seen before. I'll let you know, the leader of the other nightmare islands only have 1 or 2 cyan nightmares at most. That's to be expected. Oh, time's about up. Let's close the door. Tonight, we will feast upon their shrieks. Ha ha. The other 3 laughed along with the first, careless about the lives of the people within the camp. The boy that sat on the cliff silently was called Chu Mu. What was supposed to be a young boy shining with youthfulness was sharpened to become a concealed dagger. The reason Chu Mu appeared on this island was indeed because he was kidnapped, and the reason he hadn't been killed was also exactly because of the devilish experiment Bosksia did on him. In reality, on this entire island, other than the aforementioned foreman, all the kids had had this devilish experiment done on them, being forced to sign a soul pact with a nightmare. This was the world of soul pets. Those with talent could become soul pet trainers. Trainers could sign soul pacts with soul pets, making the soul pets fight for them. The relationship between soul pets and humans were master-servant relationships. Humans could command their soul pets to do anything. But on this completely isolated green nightmare island, things were a bit different. Every once in a while, there were many kids like Chu Mu who were sent to this isolated island and subjected to these immoral experiments. The nightmares they speak of are evil soul pets. Evil soul pets were very unique within the soul pet system. They could also sign soul pacts with humans and fight for them. However, they had the ability to devour their masters' souls. The kids, trapped within this place on their first day here, would all be forced to sign soul pacts with nightmares. At one point in time, the parasitic nightmare would eat their master's soul as food, and humans without souls will soon perish. The only way to prevent their souls from being devoured was to become stronger, let their cultivation become greater, and let their soul become stronger. In other words, they had to be stronger than the nightmare forever in order to live. This was the cruelest part of hell. Children deal not with the earnest teachings of teachers, but the fiendish, merciless savages that might take their lives at a moment's notice. Here, weaklings would become food for their evil pets quickly, while stronger people were chased by nightmares forever. It's like a never-ending nightmare. The moon wasn't visible tonight. The sea winds whipped the low-lying clouds, driving them further into the ocean. The woods wavered in the gale, incessantly crying like a grieving woman. In the campground, on the spacious flat area, there stood 100 teens in the whistling wind. Their clothes were all flimsy, but their faces showed a numbing resolve, their blank eyes showing sharpness like that of a beast's. The 100 of them lined up in a 10 by 10 squad, standing neatly together. Around them, standing near the wooden pike walls were 10 adult foremen. These foremen all stood in place. In their eyes were only coldness and indifference. Their gazes were fixed on the 100 children, constantly vigilant. Near the wooden gate, 3 men in dark clothes stood with very apathetic expressions. The burly, middle-aged man standing in the middle took a few steps forward, swept his gaze through the kids, and smiled cruelly. Today is the fitness training. You have to face your own savage pets. I can tell you right now, I will only allow 50 of you to continue on training here. That means that half of you will die today in this test. Haha, enjoyed the sweetness of death. Only people who frequent the edge of life and death are worthy of entering the Nightmare Palace. Hearing this, the 100 kids all showed signs of panic, eyeing the 10 foremen restlessly. Within the 100, only 50 could survive, meaning that each person had only a 50% chance of living. How cruel was that? But, these villains wouldn't have any sympathy for the children. With the command of the middle-aged man, the 10 foremen standing beside the wall started chanting a string of strange incantations. Every time they pursed their lips, a translucent glowing symbol would appear magically around them. The symbols were like words, projecting a blue image onto the ground and creating a glittering light phenomena. A woo oo 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 oo. A woo oo 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 oo. A woo oo 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 oo. A woo oo 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 oo. Suddenly, wolf howls sounded out from around them. The smell of blood engulfed the not-so-open campground, buffeting the lean children. Bone-white claws dug into the dirt below, with grey hair spiking up. Razor-sharp teeth peeked out of their mouths, shining malevolently. When the 10 foremen finished their summoning, 10 predators appeared in the campground hunting wolves. The savage soul pet known for its sharp and terrifying teeth. Seeing the 10 threatening wolves howling right at them, the children all became pale. A few girls even bit their lips, crying tears. Regardless of whether or not they were faced against soul pets or the helpless children, hunting wolves are very scary creatures. For food, they would attack without the slightest hesitation with all their might until their prey dies. And in most areas, even adult soul pet trainers had a tough time against a single hunting wolf, let alone these unarmed, unlearned children. Book 1, Chapter 2, Survival Instinct. Chu Mu stood at the fourth spot of the fifth row. He knew that if he didn't quickly think of a method, he would become one of the 50 kids facing imminent death. Regarding hunting wolves, this sort of soul pet, Chu Mu absolutely understood them. When he was in his clan, he had already learned various means to understand soul pets. Hunting wolves were soul pets, a beast type that were part of the beast world, and were part of the wolf clan. According to the color of their fur and the build of the hunting wolves in front of him, they had most likely reached the 8th stage. Beasts like these hunting wolves at the 8th stage were in no way inferior to a robust, grown man holding a large blade. Thus, Chu Mu knew that in order the method to survive, in no way rested upon defeating these hunting wolves. Instead, he had to think of a method to dodge the hunting wolves' attacks until 50 other children were killed first. Ow! 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 The palpitating sound of wolf cries echoed through the air, stirring up an evil and demonic wind. Subsequent to the command of those cruel men, 10 hungry hunting wolves immediately launched themselves onto the group of unarmed and defenseless children. The sound of crying and wolves howling immediately became one. The originally orderly formation instantly collapsed, and the children on the edges frantically rushed towards the center of the group. This was in order to prevent themselves from being eaten by the wolves first. However, the field was only so big, and with a total of 100 people, no matter how much one pushed or shoved, those who had the weakest physical constitutions were ultimately pushed out into the edges. Intense, miserable cries resounded out, and a pale-faced youth's arm was bitten off by a wolf with a comparatively larger build. The young and tender arm was suspended in between the hunting wolf's wolf teeth as the captivating color of fresh blood terrifyingly dripped from the wolf's lips. More and more miserable cries rang through the air. In another spot, a few children had perished at the sharp claws of the hunting wolves. These serrated claws easily ripped through the delicate skin of the children. It tore so far into the flesh that it was possible to see their bones. The fiercest attack of the hunting wolves lay in their utilization of claws and wolf teeth. The deep, white-colored claws ruthlessly tore into the children's faces and stabbed into their bodies. Their teeth went so far as to bite through their necks. The intoxicating color of fresh blood astonished the heart as it began to form a small stream that calmly flowed on the muddy ground. The young children in the field cried their eyes out and let out blood-curdling shrieks. Riddled with scars and bruises, they crawled and rolled around. Fear was omnipresent in their eyes. The small corpses left lying in the pool of blood further portrayed an already extremely wretched scene. However, in a completely opposite manner, were the surrounding cold and callous attendants. Some of them even wore tyrannical smiles. Chu Mu's location within the human group was at the center. This allowed him to avoid the first few attacks of the hunting wolves. Nevertheless, following the fleeing and crowding of the children begging for survival, Chu Mu slowly came into the hunting wolves' lines of sight. Fortunately, there was another child in front of Chu Mu. Chu Mu remembered the name of this child, Zushengmo. Among those who were sent to the island, he also seemed to be the child with the best aptitude. Chu Mu knew that this was an extremely cruel island, and harboring sympathy was tantamount to sending oneself towards a path of death. This was particularly pertinent to those who didn't have strength, so when he saw a hunting wolf pounce on Zushengmo, Chu Mu decisively chose to ignore it. Zushengmo's physique was slightly larger, and he was half a head taller than Chu Mu. Upon seeing the hunting wolf pounce on him, Zushengmo also paled and subconsciously retreated. Zushengmo's movements could still be considered fast, as he was just barely able to dodge the hunting wolf's sequestered attack. However, when the hunting wolf finished adjusting, it would be hard for Zushengmo to dodge again. It was at this time that Zushengmo discovered Chu Mu beside him. Seeing Chu Mu, Zushengmo seemed to see a hope of survival and unexpectedly threw himself towards Chu Mu. Relying on his sturdy body, he grabbed Chu Mu and ferociously pushed him towards the hunting wolf. Chu Mu did not even have enough time to react and his body was instantly pushed towards the impending forest-wide wolf teeth. The two sharp forest-wide canine front teeth were at least 20 centimeters long and hung over their lower jaw. Currently, it was exposed to Chu Mu's eyes, and they were so close that Chu Mu could smell the hunting wolf's terrifying breath. The hunting wolf's attack was merciless and aimed to slaughter. When Chu Mu neared it, the hunting wolf immediately opened its mouth and aimed for Chu Mu's neck. At the brink of life and death, Chu Mu used an extraordinary amount of effort to twist his body and dodge the hunting wolf's fatal strike. Nevertheless, simultaneously, Chu Mu felt a slight chill on his neck. He had clearly been grazed by the sharp wolf teeth. After Chu Mu twisted his body, he borrowed the momentum and rolled over 4 meters away on the ground. Da. The sound of footsteps was heard from behind Chu Mu. He instantly realized that the hunting wolf that had bitten Heir was now pouncing towards him. His heart was both confused and panicking. However, he still tried to remain cool-headed. Chu Mu remembered all of the abilities that the hunting wolves possessed, and if he guessed correctly, when sneak attacking from behind, the hunting wolf would choose the Violent Wolf's Demonic Strike. Violent Wolf's Demonic Strike was a continuous stream of claw strikes that could be performed by the majority of hunting wolves. Even if it was a grown person, he would most likely perish after 4 of these powerful and continuous claw strikes. Chu Mu ground his teeth and after guessing the hunting wolf's method of attack, he instantly ducked and curled himself into a ball. Originally, Chu Mu only needed to lie on his stomach to avoid this attack, but Chu Mu understood that if he were to only lie on his stomach, the hunting wolf would most likely jump on top of him. At that point, the only thing that awaited him was the misfortune of death. If he were to crouch into a ball, it would be the most effective way of protecting his vital parts. When the hunting wolf took time to recover, this was when he could break into a run and flee. As expected, the hunting wolf vigorously chasing Chu Mu extended its claws and when it approached Chu Mu, it instantly performed Violent Wolf's Demonic Strike. Suddenly, a continuous stream of 4 powerful claw attacks evasively streaked across with a cold light. Shwa shwa shwa. 3 claw strikes hit the air due to Chu Mu's crouching. Sealer. The 4th strike, however, directly tore into Chu Mu's back and left a deep scratching scar on his back. Immediately, fresh blood freely flowed. Chu Mu sucked in a breath of air. The acute pain from his back was akin to the being burned by raging flames. The claw tore apart and lacerated Chu Mu's flesh. Fresh blood proceeded to flow from his back. Chu Mu bit his teeth and after the hunting wolf finished its attack, he jumped up from the ground and instantly ran in a direction where there were no hunting wolves. The fresh blood from his back promptly followed his frantic escape and created a spluttering bloody footprint. Currently, Chu Mu's complexion was pale, without any hint of blood. His face was even slightly twitching. However, an expression of staunchness and resolution broke through the weak complexion. This sort of expression, for a 15-year-old child, meant that not only was he brave and determined, but he also possessed a will that was engraved among his own instincts to survive desperate straits. It was the survival instinct coveted by many. Book 1, Chapter 3, Coerced into Death. Pa, pa, pa. A few sounds of clapping rang through the bloody camp, signifying that the terrifying nightmare had finally come to an end. The smell of blood in the camp was carried away by the caress of the sea breeze and began to permeate into the surrounding environment. Quite fittingly, rain began to fall from the sky onto the camp, splashing onto the faces of the trembling children. It washed the small corpses of the children lying in pools of their own blood, cleansing the blood off their bodies. The camp began to turn muddy as the rain water and blood mixed together. The ruthless hunting wolves were restrained by their soul pet trainers. After the slaughter, there were exactly 50 people left, the remaining having been met with death. The nightmare in the bodies had probably already devoured their souls. Later, their bodies would be brought to another area where the nightmares, which had eaten their fill, would be extracted from the corpses which would then be thrown into the boundless ocean. Starting tomorrow, you can move independently around the island. The island contains myriads of soul pets which suit you, and you can choose to sign a soul pact and train on the island with them. In 3 months' time, You will participate in a decisive duel. Those that finish in the top 10 will be sent to another island where they will continue training their nightmare. As for the others, fourth, you will be thrown into the ocean as shark bait. The middle-aged man pointed at the surviving children and spoke to them in a loud voice. After speaking, the middle-aged man exposed a callous smile as he continued to speak. Of course, you had better not neglect the nightmare in your bodies. If you don't quickly increase your own soul power, then you will end up becoming pitiful food. When he mentioned the nightmares in their bodies, the faces of the children paled many times over. Each of their expressions dulled, as they were engulfed by feelings of both helplessness and despair at being chased to the bitter end by death. Return to your nests. You should feel happy about surviving. It's only a pity that tomorrow, you will once again face another death challenge. One more thing, a word of advice: don't enter the island's inner region. That place is a death zone for you guys. Without a shred of mercy, he instead sneered, and the 13 foremen turned around and left. Left in their wake were the 50 corpses dripping in blood. On the campground, the rainwater continued to cleanse these petite corpses of blood. The surviving children could only step on their corpses to walk out of the campground and onto another location in the camp where they lived. The lodging facilities were made up of 25 wooden houses. They could still be considered both durable and exquisite as they sat orderly next to the ocean. Thus it could be said that the environment wasn't bad. Of course, the reason why the surroundings weren't bad wasn't because those cold-hearted people wanted to give the children a good lodging accommodation. Instead, this island was meant as a long-term nightmare training camp. When this batch of children either died or left, other children would be sent here and their tears and blood would reappear. Chu Mu's back was already split open, and returning to his own wooden house was clearly very strenuous. Once he opened his door, Chu Mu felt someone splash water onto his back, causing a wave of searing pain to course through his wound. Chu Mu angrily turned his around and saw Zhu Shengmo wearing a smile that caused one to loathe him when looking at it. What luck you have. You didn't even die in this kind of way. Zhu Shengmo sneered. Chu Mu laughed grimly and couldn't be bothered to argue with this person. This was because in Chu Mu's eyes, sooner or later, Zhu Shengmo would be a dead person. Even if he wasn't slaughtered by the foreman's soul pets, Chu Mu would personally murder this bastard. Truthfully, when we were in field, I was helping you. Perhaps in a short while, when the nightmare devours your soul, you will regret not being quickly killed by the hunting wolf's claws, as it isn't as bad as bearing the pain of having one's soul devoured. Ha ha ha. Zhu Shengmo let out a loud laugh, and once he finished speaking, he turned around and abruptly left. Chu Mu watched the slightly plump and hefty person and let out a sneer. At this age, the expression he exposed shouldn't have been this shrewd. The shrewdness Chu Mu possessed came from his clan's education coupled with being forced to undergo this sort of hellish activity. Any child that was sent here would have a dark and callous heart. Chu Mu opened the door and walked into the wooden house. Originally, there were 3 other people who lived in the wooden house. However, it was very clear that they could never return again. After all, those 3 were too weak and small. Chu Mu didn't interact with them and only remembered that among them, there was a small girl. This girl's body was weaker than the male's, and the chances of the girl surviving under the onslaught of the hunting wolf's claws was next to nothing. Therefore, it could now be assumed that the wooden house belonged to Chu Mu exclusively. Blood was still flowing from Chu Mu's back, and he changed his wet clothing first and used water to wash off the filth on his body. Subsequently, he cleaned his wound and then, from his drawer, grabbed injury medicine for his wound left by the foreman. It was evident that using the injury medication by himself to reach the wound on his back would be very hard. Chu Mu lay on the bed and seemed abnormally strained. He let out a loud shout and even managed to injure his wound more a few times. However, he ultimately wasn't able to successfully apply the medication to his wound. "Let me help you." Ah! The 2 sounds appeared extremely suddenly. The prior voice was comparatively exquisite, but because Chu Mu didn't realize that there was someone else in the room, he had jumped onto the bed with extreme vigilance. The reason why he let out a miserable shriek was due to the intense movement causing a wave of splitting pain to course through his wound. "It's you didn't die." When Chu Mu saw the dripping wet young girl, Degrees? Degrees? He let out a bitter laugh. I survived by a fluke. Let me help you apply it, the girl said. The girl's name was Ting Yu and she also lived in the wooden house. Chu Mu had believed that she was already dead and didn't expect that aside from a few scratches, there unexpectedly weren't any clear wounds. It seemed like she was also a smart child. Chu Mu nodded his head and lay on the bed, letting Ting Yu help him rub medicine on the wound. While the girl helped him to apply medicine, Chu Mu still maintained a trace of vigilance. After all, in 3 months, only 10 people would be able to survive. If this seemingly weak child was vicious and merciless, there was a chance that she would want to thin out the competition and kill him while using the excuse to apply medicine. Ting Yu very carefully smeared the medicine. There were no sketchy movements during the entire process and Chu Mu slowly felt the pain alleviate. Today I helped you, so in the future, if I have any problems, you also have to help me. Is that okay? After Ting Yu bandaged up Chu Mu, she spoke. The girl was very realistic, but expressed that she didn't harbor any ill intent towards Chu Mu. She only wanted to maintain a relationship as an ally. Chu Mu nodded his head and insipidly said, I'll try my best. My cyan nightmare's growth is very fast. In 10 days, it has a chance of maturing into the 3rd stage. I'm scared that my soul power isn't enough to supply it and that my own soul will be devoured by it. Ting Yu sat on her own bed and embraced her knees as she shivered with cold. Try your best if you don't want to die. Chu Mu could only offer a phrase of comfort to Ting Yu's hidden bitterness. Soul pets had means by which they increased their strength. The demonic nightmare soul pet was no different. For instance, the hunting wolf in front of Chu Mu earlier. From birth until infancy, a hunting wolf would begin to experience its so-called maturation and would start growing from the 1st stage. The foremen's hunting wolves on Nightmare Island were all already of the 5th stage and their attack power was extremely powerful. Children, without the strength to truss a chicken, would definitely be unable to resist against them. As for the nightmares in Chu Mu and the other children on the island's bodies, they would also grow one step at a time. Currently, everyone's nightmares had probably already entered the 2nd stage. Every time the nightmare would advance a stage, the quantity of food it required would amplify. Before, there had at least been 200-300 people whose souls had been consumed when their nightmares reached the 2nd stage because their soul power wasn't sufficient to nourish the nightmares. I feel as if you aren't even the least bit worried. Are you extremely confident in yourself? Ting Yu asked. Chu Mu bitterly shook his head, but didn't speak to Ting Yu. Truthfully, among all the other children, Chu Mu was the least likely person to survive the onslaught of the nightmare. This was because all the other children had signed a soul pact with a cyan nightmare. Only Chu Mu harbored a white nightmare in his body which was much more terrifying than the cyan nightmares. While both were at the 2nd stage, the white nightmare would still eat a lot more than the cyan nightmare. Moreover, the more it grew, the quantity of food it required would also double. This was not something that a child could bear, and this was also the reason why the foremen all firmly believed that Chu Mu was already a dead man. The amount of people that managed to survive the White Nightmare's curse were almost zero. In other words, White Nightmares were fundamentally killers, and Chu Mu's fate was already decided when he made a soul pact with the White Nightmare. This form of being coerced into death could only force Chu Mu to unleash his greatest potential to raise his own strength. Book 1, Chapter 4, Looking for a New Soul Pet. Inside the hall of an even more prominent and luxurious wooden cabin, another spot in the camp, were 4 males. Among them, 3 were the 3 middle-aged foremen who had just previously watched over the children. These 3 foremen were the heads of Cyan Nightmare Island, and they each had 20 foremen under their command. On this island, whatever they said was law. However, currently, these 3 Cyan Nightmare Island chieftains were reverently and deferentially standing in front of a male wearing white clothes. Previously, when they faced the children, they were cruel and vicious, but none of those emotions was showing now. In fact, they were even afraid that their expression wasn't even cordial enough, and that they weren't acting as reverent as they should have. Note, low as in plebeian-like. Letixia, for you to be able to once again visit our island, it truly is our honor. The foreman acting as the head spoke up. Cao Yi, has the brat that I threw here died yet? said the male called Leaderxia. This Leaderxia was about 30 years old. His skin was pale and it gave off the appearance of someone who was weak and sickly. His entire body gave one an ice-cold feeling. For the time being, he hasn't, said the island chieftain Cao Yi. Leaderxia revealed a somewhat shocked expression and muttered to himself, in Gangliuo City. The employer data clearly indicated that this brat had only just recently entered the soul disciple realm. Thus, it is reasonable to say that this sort of weak soul power should have been devoured by the white nightmare when it enters the second stage. Why has he not died yet? To the side, the three men didn't know what Leaderxia was talking about and could only look at each other inquisitively. Leaderxia, do you want us to directly kill him? If your white nightmare is to eat that sort of a weak soul, it will be an insult to your honorable white nightmare. Cao Yi finally said. There's no need for that, since he hasn't died. That shows that his soul force is still enough to provide for my white nightmare. It seems that this brat still has a bit of ability. He's not a nobody like the others think. That's fine too. Temporarily, there isn't a suitable host body, so I'll let him nurture my white nightmare first. Not everybody is able to raise it a few stages, Leaderxia said. After speaking, Leaderxia stood up and said, continue to let him receive training here. After he dies, you can send the white nightmare back to my island. What if he doesn't die? One of the adjacent foremen asked in a low voice. Idiot. What kind of a white nightmare doesn't need over 1,000 corpses to lay its foundation for growth? How can that brat survive? Cao Yi immediately scowled at his own subordinate. Yes, this small one is dumb, this small one is dumb. The foreman who asked too much instantly nodded his head like he was pounding garlic. Leaderxia let out a profound laugh and didn't say any more. He turned around and walked out the door. Truthfully, this Leaderxia didn't believe that Chu Mu could survive. This was because the every growth of a white nightmare left behind a trail of blood. They frequently needed up to 1,000 relatively high-quality host bodies before the white nightmares were sufficiently supplied for. The newborn white nightmare of Leaderxia could still make do by devouring the soul of a child soul pet trainer with potential. Nevertheless, this was only because the white nightmare was at a low stage. Once the white nightmare increased its stage, the quantity of food it ate would exponentially grow, signifying that this white nightmare needed to search for a host with stronger strength. It was no longer something that Chu Mu, this sort of 15-year-old, weak soul pet trainer, could provide. This Leaderxia estimated that when the white nightmare grew to the third stage, Chu Mu's time would be just about over. Inside a wooden hut, the high stage and skilled soul pets on this island should be of a limited amount, so we should capture our battle soul pets earlier. If we obtain a trash soul pet, even if we pass the 3 months of stringent training and cultivation, it will be extremely hard to obtain the top 10 spots. Last night, the events from the life and death struggle caused Tingyu to not sleep very long. On the morning of the second day, she definitely decided to set out and capture her own soul pet. Yes, I wish you good luck. Chu Mu lightly nodded his head and spoke to the ready and waiting Tingyu. What? Do you not plan on going with me? Tingyu asked. I'll travel alone. You also don't want to make this room only have one person left because of an encounter with a good soul pet, right? Chu Mu nonchalantly said. Tingyu pursed her lips and said, but, if more people don't work together, how will one person defeat a soul pet, let alone capture it? Generally speaking, the first time a soul pet trainer fought a soul pet, one would be supported by his or her clan, teacher or elder. Only after experiencing a period of nurturing would one be able to truly fight as a soul pet trainer. The training style of this Nightmare Island was particularly unique. It required soul pet trainers to think of their own methods to obtain their first battle soul pets. Apart from the nightmare, most likely, they would have no choice but to personally fight with the soul pets. You should also realize that we live in a pillaging society. If you were to team up with others unless you possessed a superior body like Zhu Shengmo, who when forming a team had no one attempt to steal his soul pet, there will definitely be casualties in the group. Thus, if you truly want to obtain your own satisfactory soul pet, the best option is to go alone, Chu Mu earnestly said. But it's because I don't trust others. Tingyu was spoke in a somewhat cute manner. I'm not worth trusting either, Chu Mu said. After speaking, He walked out of the wooden room with a bag. Ting Yu watched Chu Mu's figure from behind and stamped her feet in rage. She said, "Fourth, you've already forgotten that I helped you apply medicine yesterday. Worse comes to worse, if we were to encounter a good soul pet, I would have let you pick first." "You petty person." Chu Mu ignored Ting Yu's grumbling. After all, applying medicine was an easy task, and perhaps when Ting Yu one day sustained an injury, Chu Mu would also help her apply medicine. This place was a barbaric, bloodthirsty and cruel, barren island. It wasn't a civilized city. Why did he have to understand how to cherish a younger sister, or show courtesy to a young lady? After the healing medicine had been spread for a night, Chu Mu was able to freely move again. The slight pain on his back wasn't too disturbing. Previously, Chu Mu had already gained a thorough understanding of the island's topography. In order to enter the fairly lush jungle, Chu Mu moved like a small fairy as he quickly broke past hindrance after hindrance towards the center of Cyan Nightmare Island. The perimeter of Nightmare Island was 20 kilometers, and although the island had been occupied by Nightmare Palace for a long time, the foremen would only mostly occupy the outskirts of the island. They would rarely enter within the 10-kilometer radius of the inner island to move about. Cyan Nightmare Island itself was a small ecosystem. This place had a plethora of different soul pet habitats. In order to capture a good soul pet, not only was luck required, but outstanding perception and sufficient strength were also needed. Luck naturally referred to coming across a high-ranking soul pet. Perception ability referred to whether or not one was able to discern the rank and aptitude of the soul pet. Strength referred to whether the soul pet trainer himself was able to capture the soul pet. In theory, no matter how weak or formidable a soul pet was, there was always a chance to obtain it. A majority of the children had already begun searching for soul pets on the outskirts of the island. These people would walk and stop frequently, and every time they saw something living, they would meticulously observe it in order to make sure they weren't passing up a good soul pet. Chu Mu, however, wasn't the same. He didn't stop at any area in the outskirts of the island. No matter what kind of soul pet he encountered, he didn't stop to look at it. Instead, he directly raced towards the inner area of the island. The inner island was a dangerous area. Even if it was those foremen, they wouldn't have dared to so easily enter this area. The reason Chu Mu had the audacity to proceed was not because he was aiming too high or because he had enough confidence in himself. Instead, he knew that if he were like the other children and only stayed in the outskirts of the island to search for a relatively low-quality soul pet, perhaps only if he had plentiful knowledge and perception would he be able to obtain one of the first 10 spots in the competition. Nevertheless, even after overcoming this challenge, he wouldn't be far from death. This was because the white nightmare in his body was much more terrifying than a cyan nightmare. Without a powerful soul pet, there would be severe limitations to Chu Mu's ability to raise his own body's strength. It wasn't that Chu Mu wanted to build a solid foundation with a good soul pet and slowly but surely allow himself to become stronger. Instead, it was that he fundamentally couldn't lower his own requirements. He also absolutely could not put his own position on the same level with the other children on Cyan Nightmare Island. He had already been forced onto a road of death. The only option that he had was to fight to live on the field of death. Note: Chinese idiom. Book 1, Chapter 5, Bramble Demon. Chu Mu had received a very well-rounded education ever since he was born. This included physical exercise, so though it had been very challenging to run through the rough terrain, Chu Mu could still withstand it. Chu Mu advanced along a small stream. The stream was formed by the snow on top of the sword-like mountain in the middle of the island. By walking against the water's flow, Chu Mu wouldn't get lost anymore. Mandy monster? Chu Mu suddenly slowed down, staring intently at a soul pet that was drinking 100 meters away. Mandy monsters had a trunk much like that of a lizard, with a pink body and sharp ears. They were part of the beast type of the beast world. The Mandy monsters were a short-range fighter that excelled in defense and power while weaker in speed and agility. The species rank of the Mandy monster should be around medium. A soul pet's power was decided by its stages, and stages could be improved through fighting, among other methods. As long as they were trained well, they could always be improved. From the first stage, to the 4th stage, to the 9th stage, and even higher. Thus, stages weren't an accurate measure of a soul pet's potential and quality. Species rank was the most important indicator. Species rank shone a species advantage of a soul pet. Two soul pets could both be at the 5th stage, yet the soul pet with a species rank of medium would be much stronger than the soul pet with a species rank of low. This was an inherent advantage. It was like comparing a tiger and a dog. No matter how well you trained a dog, it would still be hard for it to defeat a tiger. Mandy monsters were a popular choice. After all, medium soul pets were usually easy to control and rose through stages quickly. However, Chu Mu didn't think highly of this rank. Mandy monsters had a lot of restrictions, such as their slow speed. If it met a soul pet that was agile or could cast spells, it would lose without a doubt. Chu Mu didn't plan on lingering around this Mandy monster. Mandy monsters were quite mild, so if Chu Mu didn't bother it, he wouldn't get attacked. As Chu Mu walked past the Mandy monster, it pulled its head out of the water, its big eyes watching Chu Mu. Seeing that Chu Mu had no other intentions, it went back to drinking from the stream. Second soul pact. Capture. Suddenly, a bright voice sounded out fervently. Chu Mu immediately looked towards that place and saw a kid of his size trying to cast a soul pact. Chu Mu knew this person. He was called Sen and had brown hair with pale skin and freckles. Hee, don't even try to fight over it with me. Though Sen didn't say anything, he could see the smug smile the guy was emanating. Happy about casting his soul pact first. Chu Mu smiled coldly and decisively walked away faster. Once a soul pact was cast, there would be two results. One result was that the soul pet would become the trainer's, and the other was that the soul pet would become enraged. Though this particular Mandy monster's rank was low, from its appearance, it seemed to be at least the 4th stage. Being a fully healthy soul pet, the chances that the weak Sen could capture it were less than 1%. And the consequences of failing was obviously, sure enough. The Mandy monster was enraged, frenziedly rampaging through the undergrowth towards Sen. Sen's smug smile instantly got wiped off of his face, and he ran, panicking, further into the undergrowth. Chu Mu glanced at the messy undergrowth and laughed silently, ignoring the kid. As he advanced, the commotion slowly became distant. Chu Mu prepared plenty of food and water for this long trek. The first day, Chu Mu advanced about 7 to 8 kilometers before the sky became dark. Chu Mu hid within a small granite cave, blocking the entrance with rocks to prevent more savage soul pets from eating him. In the night, Chu Mu started cultivating. Soul pet trainers mainly trained their soul power. Soul power was the source of energy, as well as the source of Chu Mu's life. On the morning of the second day, Chu Mu continued his trek. According to the foreman, the tall thorny areas were the dividing lines between the inside and the outside parts of the island. Chu Mu had long ago prepared his machete, hacking an entire road through the thorny undergrowth. The thorny forest was at least 200 meters long with trees the height of 3 to 4 meters, which was higher than some of the village walls. Chu Mu was small, so there were some places where he could fit right through. In the thorny forest, people could get hurt no matter how careful they were. Soon, Chu Mu had new wounds, and his blood was dripping onto the ground. Note. Meant to be the sound of something whistling through the air or rustling through the undergrowth. Suddenly, a weird sound came from beside Chu Mu's ears. Chu Mu slowed down to a stop, suppressing his breathing. The soft sound was heard again. Chu Mu lay down on his stomach, barely able to breathe. Suddenly, Chu Mu felt something at his ankles. Chu Mu quickly turned around to find a green snake-like creature to coil around his ankle. Ah! Before Chu Mu could react, he was pulled down and dragged along the ground into the depths of the forest. Through the rough dragging he also saw the true identity of this green snake-like creature. It wasn't a snake, it was a moving thorn vine, bramble demon. Two words immediately surfaced into Chu Mu's head. The bramble demon is a vine-type creature in the plant kingdom. Only growing in thorny forests, it specializes in capturing creatures trekking through the forest. It is one of the more common carnivorous creatures of the plant kingdom. Chu Mu knew that the moment he got pulled to the main body of the bramble demon, he would be dissected. Without much time to think in the face of danger, Chu Mu quickly grasped his machete tightly, curled his body up, and facing the pain of brambles tearing through his face, he swung towards the tentacle. Chu Mu used lots of force in this swing, so the vine snapped accordingly, leaking green fluid out of its amputated vine. Kicking away the wriggling vine, Chu Mu didn't dare to tarry any longer. Holding his machete, he quickly crawled through the thorny forest, escaping from the clutches of the bramble demon. Darting madly through the forest, the sharp brambles kept cutting Chu Mu, but he didn't dare to stop for a single second. The boundless forest seemed to have no end. Chu Mu already felt so tired to the point that he couldn't breathe. A few bright rays of sunlight flashed past, and the thorn forest finally became sparse. Chu Mu finally escaped the green grasps of the thorn forest, coming out far from unscathed. Good thing that the bramble demon was only stage 2. If it were 2 more stages higher, with 2 more vines, I would have been in real danger. Chu Mu crouched behind a big rock, breathing heavily while thinking to himself with lingering fear. The bramble demon's species rank was low, even lower than the Mandy monster. However, the bramble demon was one of the more aggressive Plant Kingdom's soul pets, with a strong early stage and a speedy improvement in ranks. If anyone caught this bramble demon, they would be able to get it to rank 7 or 8 within 3 months, so getting top 10 wouldn't be a problem at all for them. In reality, the bramble demon Chu Mu met was very likely to be caught. However, its species rank was too low. Though it had a strong early stage, it had no potential. Chu Mu decisively gave up trying to catch the bramble demon.